Right.
I'm very proud to introduce Marianne Hughes. She is the founder of Special Family Transitions, and she is amazing. She's very resourceful, and she has this drive to go out there and help people. She went through her own crisis, and had challenges, and she has learned from that. She is a very good self-study person, and she is ready to share what she learned with others to help their transition during divorce be a bit more smooth. So, Marianne, please
amazing.
Take it away.
Thank you so much, Leona. Thank you, Ms. Scott, for having me on your show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. My radio debut, so it's pretty exciting.
Oh, nice. Very good. I did not know that. Oh, yes. We were first. Good.
Right. Sure. Hopefully not the last. Yes. So my story is that I'm a mom to two special needs children, both on opposite ends of the autism spectrum.
So can you explain what that means to people that don't have a person with autism in their lives? Mrs. Scott is a grandmother of a child with special needs with autism, and then I'm a mother of a boy that has autism. So can you explain to those that are listening what that means when they're on the opposite ends of the spectrum?
Sure. So autism is a spectrum, which means you can have very severe, obvious issues, kind of like most of you are familiar with Rain Man, so kind of that end where you have a lot of behaviors, language issues, and things that are apparent. If someone looking at them can tell there's something going on with that person. Then you have the other end where it's called high functioning, and there's different names, and they keep changing the diagnoses and labels. But on the higher end of the spectrum, you have people that, I don't want to mention names, but there's like celebrities and very famous people out there that have autism, but you may not know it. But they may be a little bit quirky in some respects. They may have some social interaction issues where they may not sociable and communicate with some other people. But overall, they get by in society, and most people don't know that there's an issue. And so then you have the in-between as well. So you've got sometimes academic issues, intellectual issues, social, all kinds of areas that it can express itself, sometimes sensory issues, all kinds of ways that you can have some effects of autism.
And then for a lot of the kids that are on the spectrum, there's comorbidity with other diagnoses. So, like for my son, it's autism and ADHD.
Right. So we've got a lot of that. Definitely attention issues, OCD type issues, all a whole host of things.
Keeps it interesting.
For sure. So that's means you've got one part down, and another area shows up, or even anxiety. So, for instance, my story, I guess I'll kind of tie that in. And so my kids now are adults, 18 and 20. And so we got diagnosed with them when they were both young. And at the time, my older one was the more involved son. And so being my first child, we didn't really know there was autism right away. But after a couple of years, we kind of figured out that's what it was. And then my younger son was born, and he did so many things that his other brother didn't do. But then we saw a few things that were an area of concern, so it turns out he got diagnosed as well. And so, long story short, they both had to go to special schools, special programs, private schools, public schools, all kinds of ways that I had to advocate for them and find some therapy programs and ways to help them to do the best that they could. So as an autism parent, a lot of times we're very involved from the very beginning all the way through their high school. Even when they finish school, you still have to help them look out and help them with their future.
Did you have to? So one of my experiences, I had to argue with the pediatrician to even let me get. Well, I argued with the pediatrician. She let us get a hearing test because of the language delay, even though my son could hear perfectly. Then there was arguing with the school to make sure that we had adequate services that were appropriate for my son, arguing with therapists, arguing with, I like to argue, but arguing with all, the state to see if I can get services for my son. So you mentioned the word advocate, and I think that's a nice word for it, but I mean, you have to stay on hold on the phone for long periods of time, sometimes daily just to try to get a little bit something better for your child.
Sure, you have to fight for services, you have to fight for supports, you have to fight for therapies, you have to fight for insurance coverage. There's all kinds of things that come into play. And even in my case, I had to fight to prove his diagnosis during my divorce process. So that's something we can get into another time. But what happened was, I worked before I had children, and so when I had my kids and saw that they both had issues, we were able to have me stay home, work with the boys, work with all the other agencies and schools and whatnot to make sure they got the best result possible. And so it was a team effort, for me and my husband to take care of our kids and just you can't do things a normal family does, go to picnics and parks and vacations. We did manage to do some of that, but it required both of us to be highly involved with them. And so it came as a surprise to me when my now ex-husband decided he wanted to get a divorce. And so that did come as a shock. And
of course.
So after 21 years of marriage, I had to figure out how to deal with this and how to be on my own and how I was going to take care of my kids now and in the future to plan what their needs were. And so my divorce process took over 2 years.
That is not standard.
It is not.
In Texas, you only have to wait. There's a cooling off period of 60 days. So if you all act nice to each other and make your agreements and it's uncontested, it can be resolved as soon as 2 months, not 2 years.
2 months. Okay.
Right. So I wish it could have been done so quickly. But actually, you know what? In a way, I'm glad it did take longer.
Okay.
And the reason for that is, multiple reasons.
All right.
For one, for my children, I really had to do research and understand what their needs were going to be. So it's not like I don't want to call any divorce regular, but you have to look out for the needs of the children. And that was my primary mission in the divorce, to make sure that my kids would get the best result possible to address what they would need now as well as in the future, because once you're out of the school district and the school system, once you turn, it can be 21, 20. Actually, you do a little bit longer when you got special needs.
Some of them can be 21, 22.
Yeah, so we're depending on the child. But so you kind of fall off a cliff at that point. And so there's private programs, and those are very expensive and very hard to find, and depending on your level of disability, you may not be accepted to them. So I had to figure out, for each of my sons, what programs and outlooks they would have. And so that took a lot of time to research that.
What Marianne's talking about in Texas, typically child support ends at the age of 18 or when the child finishes high school and graduates. But for children who require more care and supervision, there's something called indefinite child support. And so Marianne is going to be taking care of her two sons for the rest of their lives. So the child support has to be extended indefinitely. But one of the things that someone like Marianne has to do is she has to try to explain to a court what is a fair amount for child support to meet the needs of the children. So you are exploring what to do post high school. As high school is extended to age 21, 22 in some circumstances, but what do you do after that? And so what were some of the considerations you had to take into account when you were thinking about decades of care?
Right. So for my older son, who's more involved, I had looked into several programs, and they would not even accept him based on the behavior and intellectual and emotional levels he was presenting.
Okay.
And so, for instance, there's a community here, Brookwood community, which is an excellent facility for those with disabilities, but based on his behaviors, he wasn't even a candidate for that. And so there were several other programs like that, some day hab programs, which are day programs, vocational programs, which he didn't have the attention span or ability to participate in.
All right.
So my options for him are going to be very limited. And so there's some programs, there's very few in Texas and around the country that can work and accommodate for that type of individual.
Some of them have a long waiting list.
And they have a long waiting list, and they cost a lot of money. Yeah. So, and then there's a public programs, but you have to be on waiver, long waiting list for those, and we don't know when those will come out. But the other reason for my being not unpleased about the long length of divorce was that it allowed me to go through the grief process and deal with the divorce and knowing how to effectively deal with the divorce and all the impact to myself and to my children.
And to the kids?
Exactly.
Good. I think that we're going to take a little break right now, and when we come back, we're going to explore about the grief cycle and talk a little bit more with Marianne Hughes. Nice. Very nice.
Back to our guests.
Yes. Okay. Marianne. Okay. And what is the website where people can go to see your special family transitions?
It's www.specialfamilytransitions.com.
All right. Good. Very good. All right. And she's also on Facebook and YouTube, right?
I am.
Okay.
And Instagram as well.
Oh, Instagram. Oh, nice. Okay. So the pictures
right.
you took today will be on your Instagram.
Sure.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we want some families to contact you. Yes.
Yes. And you can also, we'll take calls at 713-974-4000. But okay, so we were talking before we went for our break about the grief cycle. What can you tell us about that?
Right. So going through the divorce, which was not expected on my end, at first I was in a state of shock, just really didn't know what to do. And then comes denial and all these different phases that you go through, which I realized after the fact, after I went through all these, like, hey, this is actually a real thing that happens to all people, or many people, in their own way. So I found this online, and it makes a lot of sense now, and actually just hit me today. Not only did I go through this, but my kids went through it too.
Right.
And I realized that when Dr. Neal made that comment about everyone goes through their process and everyone presents differently on that. So I'll just go through the stages real quick.
Good.
And then we could talk about how it affected me. So first you have denial. And some of the things you might see there are avoidance, confusion, elation, shock, and fear. So first I just didn't know what hit me. It was like I was hit by a truck, didn't know what was going on. And then there's anger. So you can see frustration, irritation, anxiety. Yeah, I was angry. It's like, why is this happening to me and my family? What did I do to deserve this?
And
right? So my kids do. Right?
Yep. And it's hard to get at and not live in that one stage right there.
Right, for sure. So we all stay in these stages, longer than others. So and then you can go through the stage and then come back and loop around. So they're not necessarily linear.
Okay.
So you can stay in one and visit them multiple times and keep looping around. And even after the fact, after the divorce, you may go through them as well. And then there's bargaining, which means struggling to find meaning, reaching out to others, telling one story. And then there's depression, which just means you're overwhelmed, feelings of helplessness and flight. And then acceptance, exploring options, putting a new plan in place, and moving on. And so in my situation, it took me a while to really get a handle of what was happening. So when I finally did reach that, point where I saw this was, actually happening and accepted that, I guess they have it here as a bargaining stage. That's when I reached out, joined a divorce group, tried to share my story with other people, which was actually a huge help. Because before I just kept it all in, didn't really know what was happening, and that really wasn't a good situation. But from the very beginning, I didn't want to make this about me, even though, it was very hurtful. But my main interest was to protect my kids and make sure that they were going to have everything they needed. Because kids with autism, they don't do well with change. And a lot of times you have to kind of, give them, I do social stories, kind of present what's going to happen in the future and prepare them for change. Well, this was not done with any preparation. And so I had to help them and try to help find for ways for them to deal with, because they had their own ways of acting out and expressing.
Because they were dealing with depression and they didn't.
Yeah, and I didn't really understand it fully. But I can see now, like with my son, he had some aggression at school, which he'd never ever had, and so he was acting out without not knowing how to verbalize it. It was obviously a big change in his life. And so at the end, you go through these phases, and so the the part I guess I'm in now is acceptance, and
Right.
part of it is moving on, exploring options, and putting new plans in place. Well, out of my process and my experience, I didn't want anybody else to have to go through what I did. It was overwhelming. I had to spend so much time and money and energy, and so much stress was involved. I was like, you know what? No one should ever have to go through what I went through. So I decided I'm going to go out there, making my mission to help other special needs moms and dads, if they choose,
that's
to help them
wonderful.
through the special
Yes.
needs divorce process, because there's
Yeah.
so much to do, and it is so overwhelming that sometimes you just need someone to help guide you, maybe connect you with experts, help you through the legal process, even though I'm not a lawyer, but I can help kind of tell them, what you need to do, how to prepare for lawyer meetings, how to prepare for different events in the divorce process, and
It's
things
so
to consider.
important that they know there's hope out there.
There
so
is-
you're their
yeah.
hope. So that's wonderful.
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
yeah, because I've been through it. I even had to have a trial, which is very rare in divorce cases.
Yes. Right.
So I've been through from the very beginning all the way through the very end.
Dang.
And so, I'm a positive person, and so I want to take this into an opportunity to help others.
Right.
I got a good result for my family. I'm very proud of that, and a lot of that was for my work and my advocating for my children and for myself, and working with my lawyers and all my team, and bringing special needs specialists that to
Right.
explain what had to be done as part of that divorce, so that my children could get the right benefits and not lose benefits in the future. Too, that was a big part too that we had to be considered. A lot of people don't know, and a lot of lawyers may not know some of the things that you need to consider in this kind of divorce.
So one of the things we were talking about was Medicaid waiver programs, and where you are on a waiting list for several years.
Oh, like 12, 15,
12, 15 for a class.
that's a long
That's a
time. That's a
Medicaid
long
waiver
time.
program. And then also when the kids turn 18, if they can't work based on their disability, then they can't get SSDI. So they have to qualify for SSI and Medicaid.
Right.
So part of the issue with that is that they can't have any assets or income. Social Security Administration will deem child support for an adult disabled child against that child. So then they have income, which will be counted against them and could disqualify them for their SSI.
Right.
They lose the SSI, they lose the Medicaid. They lose the Medicaid, they lose the services that took years to get into place.
Right.
So,
It's a catch-22, huh?
well, it could be, but there is something called a supplemental needs trust, first party supplemental needs trust, and if the child support is paid into the trust, the caregiver parent can be the trustee and should be the trustee, and they can protect the child's eligibility for government benefits and still receive the full amount of child support and full amount of government benefits. So that's kind of a lot to deal with as a parent. You're getting so much information regarding your divorce, and then on top of that, you have all of these additional challenges because you have a child with special needs, and it's not static. It's you're having to plan for decades of care. So, Marianne, for your decades of care, I mean, that's not something you just can sit down and work out 1 hour with your attorney. So what can you help people with that are going through or maybe going through a divorce right now who have children with special needs?
Sure. Well, the first thing for sure is to establish that they do have a disability, and do it before age 21. I think that's a cutoff for some of the benefits for the future. And so depending on the level of your child's disability, you'll want to see what if they can ever be independent, or what they might need in the future to help them to gain the most independence possible. And if they can't, then what kind of supports are they going to need, and how much are those supports going to cost, and how long you're going to have them. So maybe a few years, and maybe their whole lifespan.
Right.
And then you're not going to be here, so you got to plan for someone to take care of them, or find a place that will take care of them. And so all those places, as we talked about, either cost a lot or hard to get into depending on the waiting list. So definitely I had to bring in a financial expert, as well as someone to help me with the life care planning aspects to fully get a big picture, big understanding of the whole lifespan and needs of my children, and how much my assets and my division was going to help contribute to that, versus how much child support we would need to the child to make sure that their needs are going to be met.
Right.
And there's also spousal maintenance in Texas. If you've been married over 10 years, you could be entitled to spousal maintenance. And that is a big topic for discussion for some families that have children with special needs, because typically there's a caregiver parent and a breadwinner parent. And so now you have the caregiver parent who has been out of the workforce for quite some time, maybe since the diagnosis of the child.
Right.
And getting back into the workforce may be difficult. And so spousal maintenance really does need to be addressed.
Right. So, but the problem is spousal maintenance is very hard to get in Texas. The way the law is written, if you have enough money to make it, then you're not going to really get spousal support or alimony, some people call it. So that's really hard to get. Some people may, but and if they do, it's for a very limited time.
Right.
Okay. So and then so my kids were over 18, so the whole child support process is a little bit different. And so my older child, he had already had a guardianship.
Oh, okay.
And so some of his issues were in the probate court and not so much in the family court. Even though the divorce is. It gets really complicated.
Yes.
So in Texas, parents are the natural guardians of their children. But when some kids turn 18 that have challenges, the state of Texas recognizes them still as an adult with all the rights and responsibilities as anyone else.
Right.
And so parents have an option to file for guardianship over their adult disabled child as early as 6 months before the 18th birthday.
Right.
To go ahead and continue doing things for their children that they have been doing in the past. Some parents don't understand that they're going to lose the right to be noticed at school when there's an upcoming ARD meeting for special education services. Some doctors may explain to parents that they're not allowed to go into the exam room with their kid anymore because their kid's an adult. They may have less access or no access to medical records. So if your child has challenges, which they're deem them where they're incapacitated and they can't sign a power of attorney because they're not going to understand what it is, then guardianship is warranted. So
it's
now
very
Marianne's saying
they do that. It's very important. All parents do that.
If it's applicable, right? If your child does not have capacity, then yes, you should go ahead and file for guardianship. So Marianne, you were in two courts, huh?
Well, I didn't. Well, the guardianship documentation was done prior to the divorce. So I didn't have to deal with that going to that court process. I had done that previously. But you can do partial guardianships for some people. It's supported decision making and, like you said, powers of attorney and all kinds of different arrangements that depending on your child and their needs.
And so based on, let's say we have a family who they're finally finished with staying home because of COVID. A lot more of businesses are opening back up, and so they're expecting their employees to go back to work. And so people are not stuck at home together, but they have been since COVID started, and it's come to light that their marriage really should not survive any longer, and they're thinking about getting a divorce. But they have been out of the workforce for years, and they have some young children. Now, you didn't go through that as you being the decision maker to file for divorce. But if you have, let's just say it's a mother who's the caregiver, and she is now wanting to go for a divorce, but she's afraid that she won't be able, it'll be a detriment to her kids.
Right.
What can you tell them that your program will do to help them through this process?
Right. So, I appreciate you asking that question. So there's a lot to think about as you consider a divorce. And, I guess through COVID, I think the divorce rate is increasing because there's a lot of stresses and issues that come out, I guess, after being stuck together for so long. But if you can't work it out and it's not going to be in yours or the children's best interest, and sometimes the children actually do better after divorce because they're not going to have to deal with the stress and emotional issues going on in the household. So that's something to think about too. Because at first I was, not really expecting to see myself in divorce, and never really saw it as a way for my future. But honestly, I've received nothing but support in my situation, and it's actually opened my eyes to a different way of thinking and embracing another way of life, and people who have gone through this and really respecting the challenges that they've had to go through. So if you feel like the divorce is the right answer for you and for your children, then by all means, definitely consider that. And so what I would say is that you want to have, depending on if you and your spouse can amicably agree on a solution for the children and avoid years worth of a divorce process, then definitely that's the way to go. Right? You can work on your own. You can work with a mediator. You can work with someone like Leona who can help you with a simple divorce if it's not. If it's uncontested.
Correct.
If it gets complicated, then you're probably going to want to deal with a family law attorney who litigates and is experienced with special needs, because that's another thing to consider too. A lot of them may not know how to deal with special needs and know everything that's involved. So if you do need to interview attorneys, and you can do that. Some will charge a fee and some won't, depending. But, you want to ask them about their experience in special needs, what they know about special needs trust, about what needs to go into the decree for a special needs child, and all those things that Leona mentioned earlier.
Okay, but how are you guys doing today? You seem to be doing very well.
Yeah, we're doing good. Good. Yeah. So So to answer, I guess, some more of your questions, so make sure that you have all your documents together, because a divorce really is a financial and legal transaction. So make sure you know what you have and what your spouse has, and hopefully it's all out in the open. If it's not, that's a whole other issue. So you'll have to understand that, because, Texas law, it's there's a division of property, and so you may either get 50-50, or if there's other reasons for disproportionate share, which means you might get a little bit more than the other party, then that will come into play. And then the other thing to think about is the child support aspects and how much you're going to need for that. And that's what we were talking about earlier, is trying to figure out what it's going to cost in the future, and based on your resources and your jobs and what you're able to do, then there's sometimes a formula that they come up with for special needs, for child support, but you don't have to use that formula. And that's important to know, that depending on your situation, the judge or whoever, or on your own, you can decide how much you're going to pay for that child per month, and doesn't have to follow the guidelines.
Correct. That is absolutely correct. The child support guidelines may or may not apply, and so you do want to get your ducks in a row. You want to collect your evidence. You want to talk to maybe ABA clinics to see how much tuition is and how often the price goes up, and talk to different therapists that may provide occupational therapy or physical therapy for your children. You also need to consider, as a parent, getting not just life insurance on yourself, but also disability insurance. If you become disabled, you will need a team of people to take over and take care of your children and you. And so that's another thing to think about when you're planning for the future.
Let her give us your information one more time.
Oh, that's right. What's your website again?
Your website, or your email or phone number or whatever.
Yeah, specialfamilytransitions.com, and my email is Marianne, one word, MARYANN, @specialfamilytransitions.com. So, and I give free consultations. I've got a YouTube channel with lots of free tips and support. And so I love to help out anywhere I can. I'm here because I don't want people to go through what I had to go through and deal with the overwhelm and the stress and not knowing where to turn or what to do. So I'm there to help you if you need a little bit of help, a lot of help, if it's a straightforward divorce or even a high conflict divorce. So there's all kinds of things that I had to deal with in my world, and I've been reading up and trying to learn what I can about divorce. I even became certified as a life coach.
Oh, very nice.
And I'm looking into other certifications as well. So yeah, I'm trying to do what I can to help people in what they might need. Sometimes it's a holistic approach. Sometimes it may be very specific. How do I work with my lawyers? How do I deal with, put together my financial information statement and inventory and things like that. So
Well, we are so happy to have you on our show, and I hope the listeners out there was listening to you and got your information. So we're so thankful to have you on the show. You had a lot of great information
Oh, yes.
for our mothers, a lot of great information.
Thank you.
Now,